that they're transferring out of they haven't moved out of the school district necessarily.
Correct.
They've just transferred.
It's called an inter-district transfer. So if I wanted to go from here to YC, it's an example, and I'm a resident here. You do an inter-district transfer form. The two districts have to sign off on it, and then the release can happen. And then down below, you can take a look at for the current year, our public charter. We have 157 students this year. Of that 157,
Sorry to interrupt, but the live stream went down, it's back up now. It was down for the first part for a little bit, but we have it back up.
All right.
so where did it go down at? Are
That's
we?
a good question. It was just stuck on loading for a minute and then finally came back. So I'm checking on my phone.
All right, we're not sure when the recording went down, so our first order of business was to review policy BDBDA. The only changes to that was to add religion on the second page, first sentence at the top. The next one, we're reviewing sample policy LBEA. Right now, we're going over statistics that were requested by one of the board members on attendance, enrollment, transfers out, transfers in, and transfers to public school or public charter, non-public charter, and private school.
So you can see the numbers that are there. And then in the final column that we hadn't spoke about is homeschool registration. So in this year alone, we have 46, and Tabitha pulled this data for me, and she says most of those have never been in our K-12 system at all. They just decided right from the start of their child's education to enroll them in homeschool.
So 23-24, we have homeschool registrations 46. Do we know what that was previously? Previous years?
Yeah, she didn't have that information for me.
Okay.
So my questions are, is this 4,066, is that the number that we're going to base whatever that 3% would be off of?
Now, if you take a look at our policy and our sample language, you can see that typically what we would do is we would be taking a look at it, and the proposed language is from October to April. So this January 29th, for example, wouldn't necessarily be. So what we would do is have to come up with a calculation of students during that window and then figure out what 3% is for the upcoming school year. That's how it reads to me.
Well, it says that we'll do it semi-annually. So by October 1st and by April 1st. So we do it twice a year.
Thank you. Yeah. So April 1st would be then your last date. So typically what will happen is people will start making requests in the spring if they decide that they wanted to move on or not. If currently we don't have a cap, we're allowed to cap at 3%. And you
so
can see
it
even reads there 3%.
Yeah, but it says it will calculate the percentage of students residing in the district who are attending a virtual public charter school.
Okay.
What is the number we're going to base where, like, you could say it's 200, but that doesn't mean anything if we don't have a number that we're basing a percentage off of. So like, that's my question. Are we doing both at the same time? We're semi-annually seeing how many students are in our district compared to that number that we're pulling?
Well, that's a good question. This district's never done that. This is a new policy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want to go back and I can revisit and ask how we would go about doing that, I can absolutely. So let's say for the sake of argument, that we would agree that October 1st and April 1st are our dates. My belief, and I want to double check with the other departments, that this is where we would then base those numbers, that 3% off of those dates. Would you be okay with that?
I mean, I assume so. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what counts as students in our district that we're basing it off of. Because now, like, these numbers here, this 4,066, that's students enrolled at our schools.
That's who we have currently.
That is not the larger universe of, because that's what we talked about last time, is understanding that somebody could be going somewhere else, but they're still a student in our,
They still reside in our zone. So take a look at your table over there.
yeah,
We have 4,066 students as of January 29th. Okay.
yeah.
We've got down below 157 students that aren't here, but are in our zone, but they're going to a public charter. We've got 7 going to a non-public and 36 at a private. So all those numbers there are students that live or would be potential students of Newburgh School District, Newburgh Dundee, but they're choosing to go elsewhere.
Yeah,
So I guess my question is, it says public charter, but is that assuming that they're not in our public charter?
or the virtual, is that a virtual public charter? Is that just, I don't know if there's a difference. I don't know if that's because at 157, you're, right
Well-
around 3%. It's higher than that number if we're only counting students in our schools.
Well, I think you'd have to take that 4066.
But-
I don't know that that transfer out is,
But you'd also add in the public charter number and
Yeah.
it would be over 3%, but I think that that's an important idea here is because Trevor, we had talked too about, do we expand this beyond only public charters? Is it just it felt like a weird thing at that moment that this is a very specific,
well, I think it has to be, right? And you correct me if I'm wrong, Scott.
No, you're asking very good questions. I don't know truly.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you, yes,
Sure.
that's what I think.
yeah,
'Cause I don't
appreciate that.
know. Yeah.
Well, I
It's-
would say that you would not include non-public charter. I mean, that's basically private, right? I mean, what is a non-public charter?
I would say it'd be a for-profit.
Okay, but they're not receiving government funds.
Not necessarily, no.
So it seems like that would fall under the private school category to me. But maybe I'm not.
No, I think the state probably has different characteristics. I mean, if you want, I could probably track down definitions if you're wanting to know the distinction between public charter, non-public charter, and private.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess what I'd like to know is, okay, we have our own public charter within the Newburgh Dundee School District. But I know other people within our district go to other charter schools that are public. Willamette Career Academy being one of them. So my question is there more granularity that we need here? Does this public charter include our public charter? And then, yeah, and then over on the right column, it says transferred.
So the
Is-
public charter, you got 157,
Mhm.
21 of those transferred this year. So coming into this school year, we had a history of 157 and 21 of those were added. So it would be what, 136.
Mhm. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I think that does, going back to what you're saying, so I think we do need more clarity on how that's calculated, so it's.
So
It's clear.
we want the definitions. What's the difference between non-public and private, essentially, charter schools, but then also what is the distinction then between a virtual public charter and just a public charter?
I mean, that would be nice to know. I think the thing that I'm still stuck on is how are we deciding the universe of, I'm trying to think of the language here because
So how are we going to arrive at 3%?
I would think it would be the total. I would think that it would be the total students within the district that are attending public schools, whether it be traditional or charter. I don't know that you include homeschoolers or private school in that. Because really, when you say transfer out, it's going from one public entity to another public entity,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
That's so.
Usually, but
I
not
think you-
always.
I mean, I think it's important to track students within our district that are going to private school and are homeschooled. But I think for the purposes of calculating who can transfer out, I think it's the total number of students within the district that are seeking public education. Which consumes public funds. I mean, that's really what the essence of this is all about, isn't it?
I'm going back to the first
For the large
sentence.
part.
It reads, the district is not required to approve a transfer of a resident student. So in this case, as of today, the 4,066 as an example, that would be total number of resident students when more than 3% of the students residing in the district are attending a virtual public charter school not sponsored by the district. So what we would take is what is 3% of 4,066, and whatever that number is, let's say for giggles, let's say it's 100. Okay, if I have now 101 students or one student over that 100 mark, we could then deny.
Well, I don't think so, because you'd have to factor back into that 4066, the amount that have already been approved to come.
Well,
up
I'm just
with-
saying if well, that's-
Theoretically, if that
Oh,
was,
if there was no.
well,
there
if
was
that,
no one
if that ended up being the total number.
Right.
so
yeah.
let me rephrase this. Let's then go to the next line. If you take a look, it says the district will semi-annually at October 1st and April 1st. So let's say, for argument's sake,
Mhm.
4,066 is our number as of April. That would be then we would base 3% for virtual charter school folks to transfer out. And if that's 100, we would allow 100 to go. And once you hit 101, we would cap it. Right now, we don't have any cap. This is saying, let's put a cap.
Well, and that brings up a good segue into something I found. First sentence is the district is not required to approve the transfer.
When more than 3%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you go down to the third paragraph, if the district is not approving the enrollment.
Yeah, then we have to give notice within 10 days.
No, so going back to the first paragraph, I think that there is a contradiction between the first and last sentence. The first sentence leaves it open to the district, and the second and the last sentence doesn't. Will not approve. First sentence says is not required to approve.
A transfer of a resident student when more than 3% of the students residing in the district are attending a virtual charter school not sponsored by the district. Now, jumping to the last sentence, you're
So
saying
that's not required. That leaves it open to the district. Would you agree?
the district is not required to approve. So we're saying 3% is our cap, but we don't have to. You're right. We would
Mhm.
still have that flexibility is how that reads to me.
And read the last sentence.
And when the established percentage is more than 3%, the district will not approve. So yeah, the bottom sentence says 3% your cap.
Yeah, I mean, I think it ends up getting into questionable territory with the discretionary. Like if it was, hey, there's 5 more students, whatever, let them all go. But it gets a little worrisome if it's like, well, we're gonna pick and choose this student
Yeah.
over this student. So I think flexibility is important. If we're, I have a lot of mixed feelings on this policy because it makes sense. We need to keep students like.
And we've been declining for the last 10 years. And I can tell you the state has just come out and said you can expect the next decade for student enrollment to continue to decline throughout the state because we're just not having as many kids coming into the system. So, so let me share with you my experience on interdistrict transfers, again, going from
Yeah.
one district to another. And so we had that same struggle in my last district as a superintendent. And so, we had the exact opposite issue. We had more people wanting to come in than vacating. Our ratio was 3-to-1, 4-to-1 coming in versus leaving. And so then we would cap our class sizes because we didn't want our classes, at 50 or what have you, right? So what we would tell families, it's first come, first serve. And I think that's what we would need to do here. So it's not arbitrary, whoever's getting in first. And then if we hit that number, of 100, and let's say, for example, you have a family of 5 kids and 3 of those 5 can go and those last 2, sorry, you're over our quota. That's when you inform the family and you leave it back to a family decision and you say, hey, look, we can approve for 3 more based off of our policy, but these other 2, sorry, we cannot release them. So we'll leave it to you to decide how that's going to work for your family. And that's exactly what we would do is they would come in and they'd say, well, we've got 2 kids, 1 in second and 1 in fourth. And we said, well, we've got room in second, but not in fourth. So we can accept one or not the other. And we give you time to make that decision. We wouldn't just say, bam, surprise. So that's how we worked it. And you're right. It can be tough.
So I'm just thinking like if the board was to pass this, like we would be over 3%. Yeah. We would already be over 3%.
Well, I think the other thing that you have to take into account, the numbers aren't here, but there is an exclusion on the last page that says if somebody's already enrolled in a public charter school and they transfer into the district, if they're in continual enrollment at a charter school, they don't have to apply to this.
So we would grandfather them in.
Yeah,
exactly.
But then the question is,
But they would still count towards the number.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just thinking out loud. So
Sure.
157 out of, I mean, that would be 3% of that would be 5,000, just over 5,000. And we probably don't have 5,000 students based on the number.
3,000 what?
I'm just 157 would be 3% of just
Yeah.
over 5,000.
Yeah,
So if we're at 4,066 students in our classrooms, I don't think there's 900 students.
We would be denying at this point.
We would stop
Yep.
until until something happens where
That's
those kids were no
exactly it.
longer here or came back.
I think you just do it through attrition.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm just thinking
Yeah,
of that as well.
No, it's a good question. Good thought.
Well, the last thing you want to do is if you got a student enrolled continuously charge school, that's what they're used to. You don't want to tell them that they can't go there.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
think
how are you gonna
No,
thread that needle, right?
well, and I think we faced a little bit of that when you first came on board, when we had 5 new board members and there were some concerns. And so we were able to do a workaround. I think this is really what got our attention back then as well, because we want to do right by the folks that live within the Newburgh boundaries,
Yeah.
Newburgh Dundee boundaries. And we
Well,
don't want to
you
surprise
owe
the
them
families.
to clearly state what the policy is. You don't want it to be ambiguous.
yeah, I mean, it seemed to me that we would not. If this policy got passed, it wouldn't be, well, now we're gonna go back and force some of you in. It would be,
No.
in my thought, it would be you're all
Agreed.
grandfathered into this already. So
Agreed. But it could be potentially going forward, nobody in the 24-25 school year, because we're capped at 3%.
well, and the fear that there could be is that we talk about this and there is a,
Well, I think you put some kind of stipulation that this is moving forward from the date the policy is approved. In such case that at that point, you're over the 3%, you will allow you won't allow any more people to transfer and you will bring that number down to 3% through attrition.
yeah.
Right.
I'm just thinking that I would hate to even cause a fervor by having this discussion and it's like, well, I was kind of thinking about it. We better all rush to do this. We don't want that to happen.
Yeah, but here's the good thing though, is that we're still a couple of weeks away.
Oh, yeah.
And folks are watching and listening, and they'll be more than happy to share their thoughts and opinions on it, that if this committee does decide to move forward with it. The other thing I would point out too is that the responsibility that we have for the remaining students in the district as well.
Yep.
And granted, if I'm one of the families in the 3%, or maybe at 3.2%, yeah, I'm going to be very disappointed. And I understand that, but we also have a fiscal responsibility to the district as well.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think also, I made the comment the other day at the board meeting is that I want to get back to talking a large part of our meetings about academic performance. And I think you have to look at key metrics like this to look for trends. And you should be reaching out to these people and trying to figure out what is it about this place that they're transferring to that's different from what we've got? And it should be a mechanism by which we improve our existing academics and instruction or whatever that is that's causing them to leave.
And yeah, I don't know that this is the time to get into some of that, but I do know that some of it is financial ability by these virtual public charter schools to give kickbacks to families, which is something that we'll never, we can't match that. We can't. That's just not an option. But ideally, yes, educationally, for any of those reasons, it would be great. But I almost feel like I remember last meeting we had talked about that we have an exit survey for families who are leaving, and it seemed like the reality is, people aren't sitting down and filling out a big survey as this happens. They want to leave, so they leave. So I would love that. I would love to try to get that information. I don't think there's any reason not to try, but
Well, and I don't know if this is a policy, but maybe you have a line in there, a requirement that an exit survey be completed, before they're approved. I don't know. I mean, that's one way to force individuals to get their information. And I wonder if there's some of this that's just a misunderstanding, or if some of it's, calling for a need for change within our own institution.
yeah, again, I'm all for gathering any and all information we can. I would hate to be like, we're gonna, glean some groundbreaking stuff from it.
Well, when we were asking the question, when we first got on the board, we couldn't get that data.
Yeah.
Right? So. So what do we want to do with this? We've got some things you need to go back and get some clarification on.
Are you satisfied with what I've said as far as how we would arrive at 3%, or are you still wanting more information?
So say again, how we come to the 3%.
So again, for sake of argument, let's use what we have in front of us. Let's use the 4,066.
121.
Okay, so your math is far superior than mine. So 121 students could go out to and this is referring to a virtual public charter, and we cap it 3%. So I think public charter versus virtual public charter are two different animals. And so you still could be going out under public. This is only talking about virtual public charter. Yeah. So of these, for example, of 157 we have on here, we may not have 120 that are virtual. So we still may have some more room. But again, circling back around, the 4,066, 121 is roughly 3% of that, or is 3%. And we would have to do that semi-annually, check our numbers by October 1st and April 1st. And so let's say today is April 1st, we have 4,066 students. We would then look and see, do we have 121 students that are out on a virtual? Let's say we have 100. That means we would have 21 slots for the 24-25 school year. That's how that would work.
And as I read through this today, it was a bit confusing because this only talks about virtual public charter schools.
Correct.
So what about people, let's say the example of transferring to another school like Sherwood?
That doesn't apply to this policy.
So you could have 3% transferred to virtual publics or virtual charter school.
Yeah.
What about the rest of them that want to transfer to another?
This policy doesn't prevent that. And right
So
now,
we could actually go over the 3% total
if I
transfers out to some other
to other districts, to other traditional brick and mortar. Yeah, there isn't anything right now that this board has that limits that.
Well, that's a whole.
Yeah. It's a whole nother debate.
And why do you put a cap on people attending virtual public charter school?
We're just trying to slow the roll down and trying to retain more students. And again, it's with what you're saying too. What do we need to do to improve? And I think we're already seeing some numbers that have improved as far as our academics. And again, I think that really needs to be our emphasis.
Mhm. No, I guess my question is, to me, this should be all encompassing transferring out. People, children residing within the school district that want to transfer out to some other public institution. Right?
Well, I think that's the discussion for the board as a whole. If you wanted to say 3% period or 5% or 0, whatever. This is just referring to virtual public, or you could just say, you know what, this is too narrow of a scope. Scott, go back and see if there's more of a wider policy. If you think that's the direction that I need to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm even interested as well at looking at like the numbers that we're seeing here. The difference from previous year, the second line, 104. That's
Well, this has
Two-
been a trend for 6, 7, 8 years.
sure,
It's been a
sure.
decade.
Hasn't been a decade.
Yes, it has.
Uh,
I looked at those stats last year.
I mean, this goes back to, all right, if we've had kids transferring out continuously every year, then I want to see that total number that we're talking about, because it wouldn't be 4,066. It would be a lot higher if we had 100 more kids that aren't going here but live here. Then the number's already at, close to that 4,200 number. That's where I'm not stuck. I just think it would be a lot better to see these numbers and try to envision what we're looking at.
But how is that gonna change? I mean, I think that these stats are helpful for
Oh.
making other decisions, but I don't know that it's pertinent to what this policy is. And my gut feeling now is there needs to be a more holistic policy that's all encompassing to anybody that wants to transfer out of the district to another public institution while the family resides within the district. Because now we're singling out people that want to transfer to virtual public charter schools. So.
If nothing else, I see
And they're
this
gonna
as,
say, well, why?
this is
why
the first
even-
step.
Yeah.
That's all it is,
And it's not 3% a year, it's 3%.
of the virtual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, I have mixed feelings and I talked about this before. One part of me says. And I think I've talked to Dr. Phillips about this is. If there's something wrong with our district that's leading people to transfer out. Then we need to address that, but I don't want the people. One part of me says I don't want people to have to stay here with their kids if they're not happy and they're happy somewhere else. But then I see the financial impact of it too, so, but.
It is.
Ultimately, we're here for the kids, right? And providing the best education that we can provide and helping them reach their potential so they can be successful once they leave, right?
And if we have an open door policy where everyone can leave, that ends up impacting all the students by less funding,
Yeah, yeah.
less teachers to, it's really. I
It's
mean,
multifaceted.
it's tough. It's a
Yeah.
tough one.
So basically what y'all are trying to do, in my humble opinion,
Yeah.
is try and resolve issues that have been going on for years and years and years. And I think also we can do in what we have been doing in the short time we've been together is we are slowing that momentum. So for example, you can see the difference. This is my second year here. We had 104 leave last year and 53 this. And so we're continuing. And if you looked at that decade trend, it had started to slow when there was a shift here. So I think the district is actually moving in the right direction, but we're not going to be able to fix all of our.
It's a big shift to turn.
That's all I'm saying. And
Yeah.
I think the first step is how I look at this.
So my question on this policy, I think for you, Trevor, is, I mean, first we got to figure out if we're having the ability to decide, like the first line says.
Mandatory discretion.
Yeah. But after that, I mean, I think you're right that there's no extra information you're going to get me that's going to sway me I do think that the information that we're talking about is important for when we do bring it to the board, so we have a solid, clear idea of what we're doing. But outside of changing that and, going over this, I think it doesn't make sense to sit on this for another policy committee meeting. Makes sense to decide, do we want to bring this to the rest of the board or not? I feel like we're gonna have a long conversation in meeting about this.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing is you get to that. The first page, numbers 1 through 5, that section. It's just saying they can only required to use data that's reasonably available. So it doesn't
Used
say
by
how you're
that.
gonna use it.
It's giving you the flexibility, but in giving you some guidelines.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's fine, that's all good data to be looking at, but then I think we need to be clear on how we're gonna calculate that total number that the 3% is gonna be levied off of.
Well, I think we could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think my feeling at this point, Saul, is that I think it needs to be solid. I
agree.
think because it's gonna cause a lot of issues if we leave it open to the district, and I can see a lot of different avenues where that go bad and only cause troubles.
And so all of the gray,
Was that added or what?
So what that is this was a policy, and again, this is not an existing policy for us. So if you had a pre-existing policy that had been updated, the gray is the new language that the legislature said that you have to have if you're going to have this policy. That's why this was brought forward.
So we have to have that in there.
Yes, that gray language that's non-negotiable.
Well, then we either need to take out the last sentence in the first paragraph or reword it to say that it's not required.
Well, no, I think they're fine. With the OSB attorneys vetting this and looking at this, the way they drew it up, I think it says districts are not required to approve residents. But if you do, 3% is your cap. And so I don't see it as a conflict personally. But
Well, I guess I do, because it says they're not required, which when you say not required, it doesn't say.
It says the district is not required to approve a transfer of a resident student when more than 3% of the students residing in the district are attending. So in other words, 3% is your cap. And then the last sentence says established percentage is more than 3%, the district will not approve. It's just restating, but just wording it differently in my mind.
The last sentence to me says absolutely not. And first sentence says there's wiggle room, meaning they're not required. Doesn't say they cannot.
To approve transfers when more than 3%.
What's your thoughts, Saul?
I mean, I don't see how it's not contradicting itself.
Yeah.
And I mean,
I can see a parent coming and saying, it just says that you're not required. It doesn't say that you can't. But that last sentence says that you can't.
Once you've hit 3%, and it says the district in the first sentence is not required to approve a transfer of resident student when more than 3%. Why they have that twice to me doesn't make sense, but it just reinforces each other. And it's because the last sentence says when a percentage is established as more than 3%, the district will not. And so it's just basically saying once you hit 3, that's it.
Right.
First sentence says you're not required to, and the last sentence says you will not.
Yeah, so it almost reads like the first sentence says you could,
Mhm. If the district allows it.
but the last sentence says
Nope.
no.
So 3% is our number.
Um,
Yeah, I agree with you. Somebody with legalese.
yeah, and I mean, yeah,
Well, I go back to illegal and ask them about those two or OSBA powers that be and see if they contradict each other.
I guess
And then put in there how we're actually going to calculate it based on the data that we're looking at.
Well, I think that's left to the district, and these are the guidelines here. So I think it's something where
yeah, because that wouldn't be, it'd be like an AR, right?
Well,
Essentially.
doesn't have to be an AR, but I think though, so for example, you're a parent and you're considering virtual school. All right, like you've said tonight, how are you arriving at this? I think it's something we would have to put out the spring before and say, here's how we're going to do the process, and we lay it out and we spell it out. And if you as a parent are active and you're looking at it after April 1st, then you reach out and ask us questions. But if you wait until August and say, well, I didn't know after we
Yeah.
posted it for some time, don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But this is what we agreed upon.
Okay.
Okay, what am I doing?
Well, I think you should go back to OSBA and ask about that first and last sentence to see if they contradict each other. Because I see wiggle room in the first sentence, but none in the second. I think we need to have a definitive formula on what data is going to be used to calculate.
OSBA won't tell us that, but I can get you a formula if that's what you guys are wanting.
I mean, I think that you make a good point that that isn't part of necessarily the policy. That's part of the administrative side of enforcing the policy. The policy is to say,
here are your
if more than
parameters.
3% of students are, but you know, we're not going to put this year's students in. I want to know I would be interested to know where we're at. If we're over that 3%, if we're under, but I don't think that changes how I feel about the policy. I don't think that that would impact it, which I'm realizing now.
So can we just take out the last sentence, change the first sentence to say the district will not approve transfers of resident students when more than 3%?
You can do whatever you want as a board, but I'm just telling you that the OSBA attorneys have vetted this, and I would strongly recommend not changing any verbiage if it's outside of the bracketed language.
Oh,
Yeah. But again,
well,
you have that prerogative. And so that's why as an
so you're
example,
saying that the AR would have the formula?
I didn't say that.
Well, I mean, where would
I implied it, but yes,
Yeah.
probably not an AR.
But I hear you saying that if it's not within bracketed areas, we can't add or subtract to this? You're not saying
I would
that
highly,
either?
I would highly recommend you don't. I'm not telling you that I can't, because we've got a policy coming up here where there was language we submitted to OSBA and they said this was a bad idea, and I shared that and we still put it into practice. So it's up to board members. My recommendation is that you don't change language unless it's within the brackets. And in this case, the only bracketed language we're talking about is between October and April.
I agree. I don't think it would hurt to find out before or whenever these policies would come to the full board, to know if that is contradicting. I think it's a fair question to ask. Like, it just, one seems to say we could, the last line says you can't, and that is confusing.
So let's go ahead and table this policy then, and then I will
Mhm.
push that, because we'll need to have and hear the decision back from OSBA as far as how that looks. As much as we don't want to, I think if we still have question here, we may have that question down the road and we need to be prepared to answer
That's
it.
fair.
Well, and I think also asking them if we create a formula, could it be included in this, or would it have to be included somewhere else? And if so, what's the best place for it?
Okay, so contradiction, sentences. And then,
Would we even be able to implement this school year, even if we passed it?
yeah, we're gonna have to move. Let's see, we're coming up on a March meeting, so hopefully if he doesn't get back to us, I mean, we can just do, it may just be a policy. And we just get together just to say, this is what we found out, that
Yeah,
these sentences are contradictory or they're not, and here's the rationale behind. And
Yeah.
then I'm also hearing to probably submit to OSBA a potential, because we can't decide here, but a
Mhm.
potential formula
Yeah.
on how we would arrive. And if so, could we include this in the policy? Does that work?
yeah, or maybe also finding out what other districts do to figure out that formula. Because
Well, that's not OSBA, that's
Ah,
again for
okay.
the business.
That
and
makes
those
sense. That makes
guys to track that down. And in fact, what I can do instead of, how about if I just ask our business department to reach out to other districts and see what formula they use? Will that
Yeah,
suffice?
that, or even if the department has an idea of how they would go about it, just to hear and know would be nice.
Okay,
Uh,
so both OSBA and potential other districts. Okay,
but I think that you made a good point that that won't be necessarily policy, and so
no, but it will help you have a better understanding of how we're going to arrive at our numbers, because
Yeah.
you're the ones that will potentially have to answer.
I guess the last thing I have is the bracketed area. Are those the best months to calculate those? Or do we calculate them from the last day of school? And halfway through, or
Well,
what's I don't know.
the thought behind that is that if we put that information out in the spring, that's when people are starting to consider what they're going to do for the upcoming school year. If you wait for the summer and you push that out there, I was on vacation. I didn't have, why did you wait so long? That's typically what you would hear. It's, and I'm hearkening that off of, again, my experience with inter-district transfers. The other thing too, if you wait too long too, and this did affect us in regards to OSAA and athletics and student athletes transferring from one district to another. And there are deadlines there that they have to meet. And again, the longer you wait, you potentially could affect a whole team's season. That if you get this information pushed out over the summer and they're not aware of the transfer rules, if somebody left and went to another district and they weren't following the policies, they effectively could forfeit a whole season for that group. So again, that's part of the rationale behind as to why we push it out later in the spring.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is, do you give preference to people who have already been enrolled in virtual public school for more than a year?
I mean, we can only do so much, and I don't want to. If you're already grandfathered in and you're out, we would accept that. It wouldn't for us.
Okay.
Trying to track that in other districts, you'd have to hire some more staff to track that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
would we need to build into this policy that we would grandfather in?
Well, I think that's kind of how it reads at the end here. If a student was enrolled in virtual charter public school while living in another district, has maintained continuous enrollment, as such a school since moving into the residing district would be approval is not required. So that reads to me they're grandfathered in. That's how I would interpret it.
That's fair. Even though they wouldn't have been living in another district. Just,
So do they have to reapply every year?
This is the new policy. I have no
no,
idea.
but
What-
students
see
in
what you
these, they don't have to report back to us every year, do they?
I think it's a case by case situation. Again, I honestly don't know if they have to reapply every year or not, or if they're grandfathered in. because we had two different ways we used to transfer from one district to another, and under one format you did, and then under the other they didn't. And so now we're currently under, if I'm remembering correctly, under interdistrict transfers, you don't have to keep reapplying every year. But again, I honestly don't know.
And where would that be written? Just an AR?
Yeah, it would be an OAR,
Okay.
not an AR, but an OAR or an ORS, depending.
Okay. Yeah, I just hate to see. It's like trying to book a site at a state park. It's almost impossible this day. You gotta stay up at midnight and then try to book your spot. Oh, I just hate to see somebody who's been at another school for
Yeah.
5 years lose their spot because they didn't get there at midnight, get their sheet in on time, but okay. I think that's that
Table.
horse is dead. You can table.
We'll table it and we'll readdress it at another time. I can tell you too, a little bit of a shift with OSBA. And they have a policy leader there. It's been in place for a few years now. He hasn't pushed out nearly as many policies as his predecessor. And as I kind of warned you when you first were coming on and you were starting the new year as well, that I was anticipating 30 or 40 new policies rolling out. Just haven't seen it. I should have seen a second update. The former policy leader was very quarterly, and we have seen a lot of policy changes. We haven't received another policy update from OSBA, and I don't know if it's a shift in leadership. I don't know if the state and OSBA are working better together. I don't know what the cause is, or the fact that OSBA is in transition with their leadership, with their president. I don't know what's going on, but there just hasn't been that flux. And so the policies that we're looking at tonight, we've either tabled. We've got a few policies on here where our general counsel attorney has said, hey, let's update these policies. And then the last policy that we have tonight came from our teaching and learning director as she's going through and is relatively new in her role, saying, let's update and clean this policy as well. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So that's why you're not seeing a flood of policies coming in per se as an update from OSBA. Moving on to the next one on our agenda is policy KABA, Parent Bill of Rights. This was a previous policy that we had, and Saul, you said that you wanted to talk about this a little bit more. Last time we met and discussed, we lost power and communication. And so just kind of bringing this back to light. So enclosed in the packet is the previous policy that you have before you, which was enacted in June of last year and then shortly rescinded at the start of this school year. You can see the notes of the various groups. And if you notice on page 2 as an example highlighted for you in yellow in the notes, it says, or maybe yours isn't yellowized, but it just was some input that I brought forward to the board, and they took a look at it and we designed this policy. Reached out to OSBA and had them take a look at it and review it. And then we brought it before the last board and it was voted in, and the current board had some concerns and they said, no, it's not necessary. So that's kind of where we're at.
So I tried to go through and do a search on our site of all our policies to find either where these were or were not already. And admittedly, it's a difficult task. So I recognize part of the goal was to centralize that. I still see some of this, so one of my problems is this is a policy, but right at the top of the policy, it says that the Newburgh School District commits to. And to me, that just doesn't sound like this is a policy. It sounds like we're going to do what we're supposed to do. And it feels like all of this is just, we're going to do the job of a school or a school district by doing these things that I guess my thought is, are these things not being done, or is it just we want to make sure that everyone knows that these things are now going to be done?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we actually put a lot of effort into, as you can see from the other supporting documents, reaching out and getting feedback on the thoughts of this. My question, and I think we had this discussion, should it be a policy? Should it be something that,
A board
Yeah.
resolution as an example, such as we recognize teacher week or classified employee week, a
Mhm.
resolution. Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah. That, or, is it part of our mission statement? Is it
Yeah.
on the front page of the website? What's the best place for this? Because I don't think it gives or takes away any particular rights. I think part of the discussion we had is, yeah, a lot of this is maybe laid out in various other policies and stuff, but there's no one central location. Yeah,
I really come back to what you said in your opening statement in centralized. And I really think that that was, as the outsider looking in and listening to the discussions with the board at that time, was we want this centralized and crystallized. And I think you really captured it just in that one word.
And I have seen no problem with that. I do see, like, and I said it in the first meeting, part of the problem I have is that it's this idea that our policies are too scattered and we need to do this, but we're not going to go through and make sure that we, are removing these extra policies that people are going to find. And it just seems like we're inflating this overall policy document rather than let's list them all on have a link on the front of the webpage that's like, call it the Parent Bill of Rights, whatever you want to call it. And here's a link to the policy that really goes over this, not the policy that says, be informed of, or see and examine the district budget. Like that doesn't seem like a policy. That seems like yeah, this is something we commit to as a district. And you can see here that these are the ways you can go and examine that. I just don't, it doesn't seem like this is truly helpful in making sure that, if you go onto the policy thing and find policy KABA, you'll see what you can do. If that makes sense. It feels less like policy and more like, hey, here's a guideline, and yeah, almost like a mission statement, something we're committing to. Yeah. And I think that there is a difference there in, I personally have problems with policies that don't have teeth, that aren't there to, there's a problem and we're going to make a policy that addresses said problem. And in this case, it felt like the problem was there was a worry that parents don't have some of these rights to be informed about their children. And if that is the case, yes, let's make sure that there is a policy listed for that. But in this case, it felt more like this policy is really just to make sure you all know that this is already something that we're doing. And so for that matter, it doesn't seem like policy to me.
Mhm.
I have no problem trying to make sure that it's something that I would love that. I would love if you went on the see and examine the school budget. You could click and this will take you to the budget and it will tell you about our budget committee dates when you can come in as the public. It will tell you about the ways that you can have these things done, or some of the other ones. It will link to a policy that talks about how physical and mental health of your child is permitted by the state laws. And you can see we're not going to do less than this. That's for sure. Those things seem a lot better for parents really being able to go in and find that, rather than now I know that policy's in there. people aren't looking for policies in our policy. Like, that's in my opinion. Some people are, absolutely, but generally a parent isn't gonna be like, man, I wonder if I can get information about my child being in a violent incident. I don't think they would go and find this and be like, well, now I saw that I do get that. Like, that's not a policy. So that's where my biggest problem is with this. I think that it's important that we make sure that parents know that we respect their primacy of their relationship with their child. Absolutely. This doesn't feel like it's actually doing that. It feels toothless.
Yeah, and that was. So if it's not in a policy, what are other options? You talked about
Well, this is the policy committee and it was on our list to
Yeah,
bring it
yeah.
forward, so that's.
Like
I think it's still
why it's on the
important. I
agenda.
think it should be a commitment of the school district to the parents. And I think it should be front and center and made public. I don't know that you necessarily need to go each one of these and reference a policy or an Oregon statute or an Oregon, whatever it is. But I think it is saying, look, there is concerns out in the public. And we want you to know that our school district is committed to parents' rights. It says, Bill.
Yeah, and I agree. And it would be, I think it could be a very, and honestly, I read through all of the notes here. And part of it is that it almost feels like, yeah, there's some good stuff in here, but we're not going to take the time to really add this to it or use some of the suggestions. It was a short window, and I get that. But like, some of this is saying, give us lots of links. What was it?
Yeah, I think that was even said, some of the focus groups kind of got off.
Definitely got away from, but that I think that begs the question of what was used from those groups to craft this differently than maybe it was already generally decided beforehand. And I think that was what frustrated some people involved in these meetings, is that this isn't bad. I don't know that anyone sees this and is like, this is a gross document. It's just like, well, why did you even have us come in to do this when there's a couple pages on here where I don't think that anything from those meetings
Really is addressed in
Yeah.
former policy.
And one of the pages is just on a different topic, it felt like, which is like, this is good. I love this information. We should talk about how we might do home visits. But
Right,
that's
yeah.
not going to go in here. And so I think there are people that felt like I got duped. I got duped into spending time doing this. And not that that's here or there, just I would love to make a commitment. And I think that's something we can do as the board. I think it just, again, if we want to make this policy, that's great. But I think that OSBA was like, this isn't great policy. Am I correct?
I submitted this document prior to bringing it before the board, and the policy person that I reached out to saw several conflicts within the document. And so very concerning and very problematic. So as we talked a little bit earlier on a previous policy that we've now tabled, hey, let's change language here, here, and here. And it's like, I guarantee you OSBA attorneys are going to be like, you got this problem, that problem, this problem, that problem. And so there was a lot of that as well involved in this. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, if we decide that this isn't policy, then it no longer really fits with this group. But I would love to find a way that as a full board, we could say like, yes, we do commit to these things. We commit, to doing the best we can for you and your children. And I think that goes also to, we don't want kids leaving the district. We don't want you to go to virtual public charter. We want to be better here. We want to
provide everything.
Yeah. And so I don't know what that looks like. Wish that this didn't go down at the first meeting the way that it did.
Agreed.
I don't feel differently about it now than I did then, but yeah, it was a not my greatest moment. I wish that I would have been in a different point at that meeting, but yeah, I still don't see this as a policy.
Well, I would kind of agree with you. And I don't know if legal would still have the same concerns. I mean, I'd like to know what those concerns are. But if we put it in some other format, some other media that says, hey, you know, and maybe this requires a subcommittee to go through and say, hey, you know, periodically we review our mission and vision statement and stuff. I don't know how this ties into it, but I don't think if we decide that it's not a policy, I don't think it dies at that point. I think we just have to have the discussion on where it resides and how that looks.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it would also be, I didn't,
I mean, I guess it's not a policy, so.
Yeah.
That's it,
Yeah,
yeah.
the question is,
Kind of moot.
do we agree it's important? And I think as a board, we have to decide that. And
Yeah.
if so, where do we put it? And do we change it? And where do we put it? To show that we're committed to these things. And, you know, like you said, I think you said this, Saul, you know, a lot of this is covered in other areas. It could be other policies. It could be, well, a lot of our policies are driven by statutory requirements.
sure.
But I think as a district, you know, we say what we do and we do what we say. And I think it's important that parents are still reassured that Newburgh Dundee School District is still committed to these types of things.
I would be interested to say like bring something back to the board, and obviously it's not policy, so I feel like shouldn't waste too much more time right now on this, but I would love to go back and talk as a board about some of the things from these groups and really go into it, because I think that we have good information, that you got probably more parents willing to sit down and talk things out than you normally can, because it was a big thing. But we got good information and we shouldn't throw it away. But I think we can do a lot of that stuff and it's not policy. That's just my thoughts. So,
Well, it's consolidating.
and if that's the case, it would be nice to find out exactly what policies maybe either were on this list that actually aren't policies. And if they could be, because again, I see some of these recognizing qualities that just aren't a policy item.
Yeah, I think part of the intent was to more reestablish or reestablish or reaffirm the trust in the parents, the other kids in the school district. And
that's why I'm all for, as the new board, even just like, yeah, we want to say loud and clear that I want you to be informed parents. I want you to be a part of this process. It just seems to me that there's policies that say if something happens, or in the case of this, here is how we deal with it. Saying that you can see and examine the district budget, it's not a policy. It's just, of course, it's a public document. You're more than welcome to, and we encourage it. Like,
Yeah.
I'll stand up and say, please come and find any flaws that we have. Like, I'm for that. So it's not that I don't want to stand behind it. It's just that it's not policy the way that I see policy. But yeah, I mean, again, great information. I think you can't get surveys that give you back this kind of information from this many people. So to completely ignore it is bad. I just think that we should find a better way to come together as the board to figure out ways to address these things.
So I don't think any action.
Yeah.
No, it's moving on.
All right.
Let's see here. The next policy that I have is, like I shared with you early on, the next two policies are coming from our general counsel, who just said we need to update policy GBM. So if you're taking a look at, and this refers to staff complaints, under policy GBM, and then behind it, I have shown you the current policy that we have. And the only difference is if you look at our current policy, it refers to GBM AR, and OSBA has discontinued that AR.
Did they make ARs or just recommendations? for
They
ARs?
send us the template and the format, and the superintendent can adjust it. But again, we're staying, just like with policy, the superintendent will stay within OSBA language as well. And if he decides to do massive edits, then you're opening the district up. And so by and large, if there's ARs with bracketed language, then you make those adjustments there. But from time to time, OSBA will say, all right, policy XYZ is no longer in effect, and XYZ AR is no longer in effect. Delete these policies because they're no longer under the law.
Mhm.
And so that's what happened. So in this particular case, our policy from 2016 said, hey, we have an AR. And as our legal counsel pointed out to me, you don't have that AR anymore. And I said, I agree. And looking at it, that OSBA had pulled that. If you look at the sample policy, there's some bracketed language there at the end of the policy. And it says the district will use designated complaint process in administrative regulation KLAR, public complaints procedure, to address any alleged violations. So the problem that we have with our current policy of KL is it is a policy that it is so specific that an AR does not come with it. So that's why I also included in your packet, for example, if you wanted to see the KL process, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. A parent doesn't have to say, you know, this happened in class, or I'm curious about these textbooks and these readings. If they come forward and say, I've got a concern or a complaint, they don't have to fill out an AR. We would adopt it. And the KL is the basic working process. And within KL, it says, if you have a complaint, you should start the lowest level. And in this case, it says, go to the teacher. And then within 10 days, if you're not satisfied, then put it in writing. And then it goes to the administrator or designee, and then it works its way up to the board.
Mm-hmm.
So that is our operating procedures for anything that happens in the district. And then if we find it specifically addresses a policy, then we would inform and follow that process. Getting back to this though, because we don't have a KLAR, I would just simply say in that last sentence, it has some bracketed language here. It says the district will use the, in brackets, designated, I'm fine with that, complaint process. And then in KL, I would just drop the AR because we do have that in place.
Well, I'd take out designated.
You can do that as well, but I would just
The
say,
district will use complaint process KL.
Yep.
Of the complaint procedure to address any alleged violations of this policy. I mean, it's inherent, the fact that we have KL, that it's designated.
yeah.
Like how much, I guess it doesn't matter, but how much different was the GBM AR procedure compared to, you don't know.
I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah.
We're okay with aligning it with KL.
I guess it doesn't matter because they got rid of it.
Well, you wouldn't have to say KL, you would say complaint process, but then that's open to.
That's worse. That's,
Yeah.
we have to have something.
Yeah, and to me, this is our foundational
I'm
complaint.
honestly shocked that OSBA doesn't have a specific process
I
to deal
don't,
with
I
that.
yeah, honestly don't know the history behind as to why they changed then, so the AR no longer applies. That doesn't make any sense to me, but okay. And so the attorney says, you just need to update this to your KL process. And I went,
So we do, is our KL policy significantly different than what the rest of Oregon boards are doing? If
no,
it seems like OSBA has a specific AR for KL.
they have 4 versions of KL,
Okay.
and we opted the version that did not have the AR attached, because you then would have to look at policy, then you'd have to look at AR. And so we just decided
okay.
to have it under one. That was the thought behind it.
Is there anything problematic that we're gonna find from staff complaints going through the public complaint process?
Not at all. And again, if it's, let's say, for example, that there's a staff complaint and then it turns into, say, sexual harassment. We have a policy for sexual harassment, then I would inform that we're going to steer away from KL and we're going to follow our sexual harassment process and
Okay.
policy. Yeah, this is just our foundational is all.
Any other thoughts, Trevor?
Yeah.
We good?
Yeah.
Okay. And here's another complaint process, and that's, or complaint that you could use, and that is whistleblower, and that's policy GBMA. And again, it's the same situation here. If you look towards the bottom of the page here, you can say it's referring to KLAR. We don't have that KLAR. Under our existing policy, it said to use policy or AR GBM. So it's the same as the other one. So my recommendation is that we just use KL as our process.
So I'm curious to know though, under both the whistleblower and the staff, where do you decide that the lowest, the first level is? I get that if it's something that happens in a class or for a student, teacher is the first person you go to.
Okay,
If it's a staff member, they go to administration.
correct.
Unless it's administration that the complaint's about.
And it's spelled out in KL. So yeah, and so in your scenario, you're saying if the staffer has an issue, say with another staffer, then it would go to administration. If the staffer had an issue with that particular administrator that was their immediate supervisor, then it comes to me. And if they had an issue with me, then it would go directly to the superintendent. If there was an issue with the superintendent, it would go directly to the board. If there was an issue with the board, it would revert back to attorneys. That's our process.
Okay.
Yeah. Of
I'm,
course, do that quick, but yeah, I know that KL.
yeah.
But the whistleblower really just codifies law, state and federal law. Of what the rights are for somebody who brings a complaint.
Right, but also it's saying, how's the district going to follow the complaint process? And it's to follow the KL. That's our guidance.
Right, but I think it goes beyond that, just reminding people when they do this, that they can't be discriminated against.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I think it's complimentary, isn't it? I mean, am I missing something?
My thought was just who, it feels like a whistleblower complaint is going to already be past half of the steps in KL.
Agreed.
So it's not like a worry. It's just, again, it's confusing that there wouldn't be. It would be strange, honestly, to have a whistleblower complaint that didn't go above the district. but I don't know. I've never dealt with one of those. So yeah, we would change it again to
KL,
administrative regulation KL.
no AR.
Perfect.
You good?
Yeah,
Okay.
and this was the old one.
Yeah, that was the old one behind it. And then the last one came from our teaching and learning director. She is relatively new into the position. She was reviewing policy that affected her arena. And so she says, I reached out to OSBA for you. And so you can see policy IFD, which is curriculum adoption. You could see the past policy had been updated in 2007. And so you can see there's been a little more language added to it now here in 2024.
So it would move the decision making away from the board into the superintendent.
Yeah, that's how it reads to me, the updated language.
I mean, selfishly, and then the one time that we had new courses added, that was very exciting. It felt like something that was,
We're still going to bring them to the
Okay.
board anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was
no.
gonna say.
We're
I
not-
don't think that we need to approve them, but it would be nice to be informed.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we're not. No, because again, we've got to be on the same page in
Yeah, yeah.
education and the board. Yeah. And as we've learned, surprises aren't always your friend. And so you're better off keeping you informed as
Absolutely.
opposed to surprises.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that old policy is
Yeah, it's
bare bone.
and been a few years. Yeah. Okay, so that's all I have. So my homework currently is just to go back and take a look at policy LBEA, and we need to take a look in that first paragraph to see if those sentences are contradicting each other, and hopefully a little explanation as to why or why not. And then also tasked with reaching out to OSBA. Is there a particular formula that they've seen or recognized? And then also reach out to some other districts as far as how they arrived to the 3%.
Yeah, and where should that reside?
And where, yeah, if it's in policy or not. Okay.
And was I correct in you saying that we're one of a few districts that don't have something like this in place?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
No, I'm not.
For some reason, I thought it'd come up at some point.
No, my apologies if I led you down that path. I honestly don't know how many districts do or don't have this.
Okay.
Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, well, I think we hope Director Wolford gets well. We missed him tonight.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
which
And-
concludes our policy update committee meeting for Thursday, February 22nd, 2024.
Meeting adjourned.
Meeting adjourned.